Hi, welcome to episode 17 of Got a Story for You. I'm Phil Giunta, and we're back after a month-long hiatus in July, mostly due to a high-profile project on my day job. I worked about 12 consecutive days, averaging about 15 hours a day. Some days were 12, some days were 17 hours, but as you can imagine, I was exhausted by the end of that. And on top of that, I actually had a short story that was due to a publisher by middle of August, but I was already feverishly writing this story despite the crazy work hours, and I happened to have it finished, critiqued, and edited by the end of July, and I decided to go ahead and submit it. So, with those two things done, I am ready to read another short story for you here, and it will be the longest and last of my three stories from the anthology Somewhere in the Middle of Eternity. This was a speculative fiction anthology, the first in a trilogy, that was published in 2014 by Firebringer Press. I created and edited the series, and in each book I have three stories. In previous episodes, I've read the other two from this, Photos from the Attic and Don't Go Fussing Over Me. Today's story is a three-parter, and it's called Water to Share. It's a science fiction story, and in it, desperate to save his dying wife, an exiled scientist makes a discovery that could change the fate of a galaxy. But first, he must outwit a gang of vicious criminals. I hope you enjoy Water to Share. Beyond the impenetrable diamond casing of the sarcophagus, Hannah slept. Frozen in cryonic stasis, her frail body was clothed in a simple gray elastic material that prevented damage to her skin. Microscopic robots, known as nanites, had been programmed to protect her cells and vital organs, allowing them to remain perfectly preserved at 77.15 Kelvin. Never mind that nanites had been banned by the system government years ago. Dr. Isaac Geary gazed into the transparent tank, as they called it. At the time his wife's cancer had been diagnosed, he hadn't yet perfected the method for transferring human consciousness to a positronic brain. Even now, long-term memory still showed an unacceptable degenerative rate in stasis. Hannah had entered cryonic preservation 3 years ago. Were Geary to transfer her consciousness to the android now, he would doubtlessly save her mind, but would she still remember him? He dared not leave it to chance. Rather, Geary continued to work feverishly, programming a new generation of nanites that would retain and enhance human memory until such time as Hannah's cancer could be cured. Yet Geary's time was short. By now, the system had surely discovered his efforts. If arrested, he would be imprisoned for breaking the almighty moral code. For if God had wished humans to be immortal, she would have created us so. It is not our place to undermine the will of God. Yet, if there were a God, would she not want mortals to use the intellect she had bestowed upon them? As if sensing his thoughts, the perimeter alarm screeched from the far end of the computer console. System police were approaching, surrounding his laboratory from all sides. There was nowhere to run, but Geary did not fear them. He had always known the day would come when he would fail Hannah. But damn the system, he had to try. They'll probably let you die, my love. If they do, I will follow. Otherwise, I'll come back for you and bring you back to life. Either way, we'll be together forever. Geary imagined Hannah, her vivacious smile lighting up her hazel eyes. He wanted to run a finger playfully down the bridge of her nose, to kiss her full lips, all untouchable now, beyond the frozen transparent shell. The laboratory's perimeter alarm grew into a blaring klaxon. He turned away from his wife to silence the damn noise. 3 years later. Engines 2 and 5 are fried. Zaylin's crisp contralto voice was barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. Nearly every station in the patrol ship's cockpit was screeching a warning, all vying for immediate attention. She turned in her seat at the diagnostic station. Behind her, in the captain's chair, Sandor craned his neck to look past her at the two red flashing lines on the monitor. Can we shut off these damn alarms? Trying. Zaylin worked the unfamiliar console, her hands frantically slapping buttons and flipping toggles. After nearly a minute, the cockpit fell silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the three subspace engines that still functioned. She could feel Sandor's crystal gaze on her, but refused to acknowledge him. You should do something about that burn. Zaylin ran a slim finger along the side of her head, tracing the length of scorched flesh from her left temple back to the top of her ear, or where the top of her ear had been. She smoothed back a stray lock of raven black hair. The rest was tied in a tight braid that ran the length of her back. At its end, a decorative wooden clasp about 12 centimeters long concealed a short dagger. Zaylin considered herself lucky. If it had struck a few centimeters to the left, the pulse from the sissy's blaster would have drilled a hole through her head. Instead, the shot had merely burned a line through her hair. She could cover it with strategic styling, but decided to wear it like a badge of honor. Her only regret was helping Sandor steal this sissy patrol ship in the first place. It had been the best option at the time, but hadn't made their escape any easier, considering that all government ships were traceable on a restricted frequency. Note to self, don't try to pawn precious gems after stealing them from the neighboring planet's royal family. Sandor's right-hand man, that chrome-domed scumbag Shazard, had tried to disable the tracking device, but there was no time. Captain Keelan had been on their asses right up to the edge of the system before breaking off. The relentless bitch had probably hauled it to the nearest precinct base, where she would demand permission to continue pursuit outside her jurisdiction. Saved by bureaucracy. Gotta love this galaxy. We ain't making it to Zareen. Sitting on the floor beside the starboard hatch, Nuala shook her head. Sandor whirled on her. Speak only when spoken to, is that clear? Nuala met Sandor's gaze with equal ferocity, but did as she was told. Zaylin ignored the exchange, focusing instead on her control panel. Nuala wasn't even supposed to be here. She had tagged along for some excitement instead of sitting in class where she belonged. Nevertheless, Nuala was right. They'd never reach the Zorine system in this piece of flotsam. That narrowed it down to one option. The only oasis in this black desert was a binary star system known as Thern. 5 planets orbited twin suns that, in turn, circled one another in a billion-year dance of death. A red giant, Thern Secunde, was a cannibal star, leaching hydrogen from what had once been its larger brother, Thern Prime. In another 1,000,000 years, the red giant would likely go nova. Just as long as it isn't today. Sandor looked at Shazard, his partner and friend since their teen years, when they'd sold drugs and weapons to both sides in a civil war between their respective worlds. The pair had made a fortune both during the 5-year conflict and after, while the sissies had had their hands full with racial crimes, riots, and political assassinations. Yet these two men could not have been more different. Shazard was tall, stocky, and brutish, while Sandor's height and build were the only average characteristics about him. His short platinum hair and fierce blue eyes caused many a head to turn his way, and, like any practiced con man, Sandor used that to his advantage. No one ever saw the cunning behind those innocent eyes until it was too late. When the situation called for it, he conducted himself with all the maturity and eloquence of a leader. Where Shazard was the rough, Sandor was the impenetrable diamond. Zard, is there anything in Thern that can help us? His friend was leaning forward, peering at a computer screen that added an eerie blue tint to his gray eyes. He pressed a few buttons on the console and shrugged his broad shoulders. The last planet, Orelon. Got an oxygen-rich atmosphere, though most of the terrain's a wasteland. Kilometers of arid, cracked plateaus and sand dunes. Could touch down and try to repair this bucket. Of course, with the 2 engines down, it'll be almost a month in the empty quarter. The empty quarter was a region of unclaimed space between the Noltac system, from which they had just escaped, and the Zorine Alliance. An expanse stretching about 50 light-years, it contained few planets, most of them uninhabitable. Sandor ignored the moans and sighs from his crew, except Neff, the zit-faced mute with the mop of saffron hair. Neff was from Lavoy, the smallest of Cadron's moons, and dedicated to housing their society's defectives, in an effort to keep the planet of Cadron itself pure. Zaylin found the politics of her home planet repugnant, which was why she still hoped to take her mother away from there before she became too old for a society that discarded its elderly like so much garbage. Once, while on the run, She and Sandor had hidden away on Lavoy, where Neff provided refuge, food, and medical supplies. In return, Sandor had offered him a chance at freedom from oppression and humiliation at the hands of his own people. Since then, Neff had proven himself a skilled pilot, learning almost any navigational and helm system with astounding speed and aptitude. Most importantly, having a silent partner who could tell no tales was an obvious benefit in their line of business. Sandor sat back in the center seat and stroked the blonde stubble covering his chin. Neff, get us to Orlan, best speed. Zard, see what you can do about disabling that transmitter. Once we're planet side, I want to make sure we're left alone. Geary awoke and rolled onto his side, running a hand through his graying chestnut hair. He had awakened from yet another nightmare of his trial and exile from Nultak. He curled into a ball and fought to control his breathing against the sickening dread of never seeing Hannah again. Panic attacks such as this had become a daily routine. Across his cabin, a wall of computer monitors stared back. Many of them were dark and silent, either from irreparable damage or the simple fact that they were no longer relevant. It was for the latter reason that Geary was surprised to see movement on the center monitor in the second row. Long-range sensors. Someone was coming. Damn it! Geary didn't bother to shower first or even dress before padding down the hall to the main computer center. The long-range sensors indicated that a police cruiser was headed straight for Orlan and would make planetfall in 12 hours. After 3 years, it was a good bet that sensor technology had advanced enough to detect a planet's climate and terrain from far beyond orbital space. Doubtlessly, the system police were already puzzled at data that told them of lush forests and abundant bodies of water on this quadrant of the planet. Geary leaned over the center console, stretching his arm to touch the screen. The entire complex had been built by an advanced and long-dead civilization of beings that had evidently been taller than humans. It had taken him nearly 4 months to learn the systems after he stumbled upon them, and yet another year to fully interpret their language and numeric system. They had not called the planet Orlan. It was Rentasa. Geary tapped the screen and expanded a menu of options. He chose the third one on the list. The display changed to a series of virtual bar gauges. Touching each one, he slid indicators into various positions and stepped back. And slowly, Rentasa changed. Something ain't right here. Shazard pressed buttons and slid levers up and down the touchscreen in front of him. He shook his bald head and muttered under his breath. Sandor stood beside him, feet spread apart, hands gripping the back of his friend's chair as the police cruiser shook and groaned in its descent through the atmosphere of Orlan. What now? 1 minute, sensors show a lush forest with freshwater lakes and streams. Now, ain't nothing but dry desert. Which is exactly how you described it earlier. Right, but I'm telling you what I saw on the sensor images. Sensors are probably fried, Zaylin chimed in. We stole this crate from the maintenance bay, remember? Who knows what the hell's wrong with it? Not like I had time to stop and ask while I was hacking the helm codes. Should have had Neff ask, Shazard smirked. The mute snapped his head to the side and glared at him, but Shazard didn't acknowledge as he peered at the sensor screen. It finally settled in a consistent series of scrolling data and images. We'll be on the surface in 7 minutes, Zaylin announced. Strap in or hold on, this won't be a soft landing. Half the braking thrusters are shot. You couldn't have stolen something better, Nulla snarked. Sandor didn't bother to look at her as he buckled himself into the center seat. Thought I told you to shut it. You keep talking to me like that, and what? I'll pitch your ass out the airlock right now, you little bitch. You're not part of my crew. No one wants you here. For your own sake, don't speak unless spoken to. Nulla looked from Sandor to her half-sister, probably hoping for some familial support. She found none. Zaylin was focused on her job. The vessel trembled and bucked, but there was no concern for the ship's stability. All police cruisers are built for atmospheric travel. Of course, it was a much smoother ride when all maneuvering systems actually worked. Still, Zaylin had full faith in Neff. She also thought that a brief talk with Chozard was long overdue. It would be best coming from Sandor. The look in Neff's eyes told her that he didn't take well to ridicule. You know what they say about the quiet ones. I think you're right, Zay. These sensors are hosed. Getting traces of some crazy energy pattern down there I ain't never seen before. Dissipating fast. Weapon? Sandor asked. I don't think so. Wasn't directed at anything, just dispersed over a large area. Gone now. At the helm, Neff reached out and tapped Zaylin on her arm. Eyes wide with fear, he held up 3 fingers, then slammed his right fist into his open left palm. We're going to crash in 3 minutes. Chozard spun. I thought you said 7. Zaylin ignored him, hands working her console frantically. I don't have enough thruster power to slow this piece of... The others were shouting in panic. All but Neff, of course. Even Zaylin, for all her usual poise and composure, was now frantically trying to save their collective asses. She was sweating. They all were. Drops floating away from their faces. Floating? Nuala was the only one without a seat. Unable to strap herself down, she gripped a handrail beside the hatch and held on for dear life. She was suddenly weightless, the sides of her boots brushing against the cockpit's ceiling. Nuala regretted tagging along. She should have listened to her sister. Too late now. She gazed through the front viewports, sand as far as the eye could see, even at this altitude. A gleaming bronze object caught her eye. It grew larger as the beige and pink expanse rushed to greet them. Is that a building? Nuala would never know. They had agreed to bury her near the ship, using the cruiser's port guns, the only ones that still worked. Zaylin blasted a hole in the sand about 10 meters away. Beside her, Neff pressed a freeze pack against the right side of his swollen face. He did not look at her, but fixed his gaze through the viewport at what was about to become Nuala's grave. Wordlessly, Zaylin limped aft where Nuala's body lay, her neck broken. With no way to secure herself, she had been flung across the cockpit into the diagnostic console when the ship had plowed into the sand. The force caused the monitor to snap from its swivel arm and smash into Neff's face. Police cruisers came equipped with nearly all of the medical equipment and supplies of an ambulance ship, including body bags. Chozard assisted. He carried Nuala's body from the ship, moving slowly to allow Zaylin to keep up. Sandor was already outside, watching but keeping his distance. Probably a good idea right now, Zaylin thought. Finally, they reached the site. Chozard knelt and placed his burden beside the hole. He repositioned himself so that he could gently slide her down into it, but as he moved, so did the ground. The sand shifted and poured into the hole, taking Nuala with it. Her body tumbled over clumsily and disappeared, consumed by the desert. Damn it, Zay, I'm sorry. Zaylin merely stared at the grave, now just a shallow depression of pink and beige. Her half-sister was gone. She'd gone out the way she came in, the hard way. Don't worry about it. Not like she felt anything. Sandor approached, standing respectfully behind and to Zaylin's right. Should we say something? A prayer? What the hell do you care? Thought you'd be glad she's dead. I'm a lot of things, Zay, but I'm no monster. She didn't bother to respond, though a half a dozen retorts came to mind. After a moment, Sandor nodded for Chozard to follow him and placed a consoling hand on her shoulder. Whatever you think of me, I really am sorry. The man she loved, a thief and killer. She could handle all that, but she hated his lies. Zaylin wanted to shrug him off, to take the dagger from the end of her braided hair and plunge it into his hand. She was a fool to stay with him. Ignoring Sandor, she whispered, Thanks for your help, Zard. Chozard nodded solemnly as he departed. After a moment, Zaylin was alone and wishing she could jump into a hole in the sand. How the hell am I going to tell Mom? Zaylin's parents had been divorced for a decade and a half. While her own mother was still alive, Nuala had lost hers during a police raid at the Ganjing Belt 6 years ago. along with their alcoholic father. Zaylin and Nuala had agreed it was no great loss. He'd been an abusive bastard who deserved what he got. After that, Nuala had been passed from one family member to another, one planet or moon to the next. No one could handle her. She'd been suspended for fighting so often, she started cutting school entirely. It hadn't taken long for even the toughest boys to steer clear of her. Unlike Zaylin, such things as perfume and jewelry had been an anathema to Nuala. She'd been as feminine as a slab of granite, with all the refinement of a veteran astro hauler. Truly, there had been almost no family resemblance between the two. While Zaylin was built for speed, Nuala had sculpted her body for strength, spending most of her free time lifting weights. Her fiery red hair had been perpetually trimmed, nearly to her scalp. Though separated by light years, the half-sisters had managed to stay in touch after their father's death. Zaylin, who had been living on Kadron when he was killed, pleaded with her mother to take Nuala in. It had taken years, but eventually her mother relented. Zaylin had hoped that a stable home and family would change Nuala. On Kadron, the two had grown closer to the point where the delineation half-sister had quickly melted away. They'd become true sisters, and Nuala had finally begun to mature, though still possessed by that restlessness. Got that from Dad. We both did. And now, it's gotten you killed. You don't look too good, Neff. Tell me where it hurts. In the cruiser's cockpit, Shazard's smile faded as Neff lowered the freeze pack. The left side of the mute's face was a swollen patchwork of purple, black, and pale yellow. Blood hemorrhaged in the white of his left eye, surrounding an iris of emerald. Seen worse. At least you're still alive. Just don't tell Zay I said that, okay? Might hurt her feelings. She might pull that dagger out of her braid and slit my throat. I bet you'd like to see that, eh, boy? Shazard slid a tool crate out from beneath the diagnostic station and flipped a red switch on its gray metal side. It began to hum and vibrate as a half-dozen micro-thrusters set into the bottom of the crate fired. Gently, the box levitated from the deck. When it was chest high, Shazard reached out to stop it. Finally, something that works in this dump. As he maneuvered the crate toward the hatch, Shazard threw up his hand in a desultory wave to Neff. You just take it easy. 3 of us can handle repairs for now. If you need anything, just yell. This time he immediately regretted the crack, especially when the freeze pack smashed into the back of his head. Shazard stumbled forward, sending the tool crate spinning out of control until it crashed into the first aid cabinet at the rear of the cockpit. As he regained his balance, Shazard pulled his blaster from his holster and spun to face Neff, who was already taking aim at his head. The bloodlust in Neff's eyes required no words. The 2 men stared each other down along the muzzles of their weapons. What's the matter, boy? Tired of taking shit from old Zard? All you gotta do is say so. Zard! Sandor appeared in the open hatch. Without hesitation, he stepped between the combatants and approached Neff. The mute did not lower his weapon. Neff, I meant to have a talk with him a long time ago about fucking with you. Sorry I haven't done that yet, but it's going to happen right now. Put the gun away, and when you've cooled off, I need you to run diagnostics on the thrusters, engines, and fuel, while the rest of us assess the damage outside. Can you do that? Neff held Sandor's gaze for a moment before nodding. He peered over the gang leader's shoulder at Shazard one last time before stalking back to the front of the cockpit. You need to shut your damn mouth. That any way to talk to your oldest friend? It's because we're friends I'm telling you to stand down with Neff. Next time it won't be a bag of ice in the back of your head. You think you're the first smartass to pick on him because he's a mute? He's had a lifetime of that shit. I'm sure he has. You weren't there on Lavoie. I watched him deal with people who bully him. They don't stay breathing for very long. You're only alive because of your status with me, but even that will only go so far. Consider this a friendly warning. Keep pushing him, and the next hole in the sand might be for you. So how screwed are we? The men backed away from each other as Zaylin approached. She was glad to hear Shazard chastened. While she was grateful for his help with Nuala, he could otherwise be a bastard. Well, Neff's running diagnostics inside. We were just about to check the damage out here. Could use another set of eyes. How about another set of hands? All three drew their blasters on the newcomer, strolling toward them from the cruiser's aft. He was taller than Shazard, helped by his ramrod straight posture. A one-piece tan jumpsuit hung from his gaunt frame. His head was wrapped in a white cloth that covered the back of his neck and revealed only his face. Even that was mostly concealed behind enormous sun goggles. The man held up both hands, palms out. I'm unarmed. Who are you? Where'd you come from? Name's Isaac, and I come from the other side of the sand dunes to the west, where I've lived for the last 3 years. Zaylin was astonished. 3 years? How come we ain't see you approach? Shazard holstered his blaster. You seem preoccupied, whoever you are. Maintenance crew with the Noltak police, Sandor said. After introductions were made, he continued. We were taking this cruiser out for a test run, but we had engine problems. We hoped to set down here for repairs, but the landing was a little rough. So now matters are worse. Afraid so. We didn't know anyone lived on this rock. Isaac smiled thinly. I wouldn't call this rock home had I not crashed here. Like you, I had engine failure, and my communication system was destroyed on impact. I didn't have parts to repair it. I barely had a ship left, in fact. No one tried to rescue you? Zaylin asked. Family? Friends? None of the above, my dear. Because I have none of the above. May I ask, are you from Cadron? I am. I thought as much from your violet eyes. They're most intense. Legend has it that the eyes of a Cadronian woman have the uncanny ability to detect even the smallest lie. Zaylin shot a sidelong glance at Sandor. If that were the case, I wouldn't be here, and my sister wouldn't be dead. Isaac smiled. Everyone ends up exactly where they belong in the end. As for me, I probably have no life to return to, but surely you can contact the closest precinct for help. Zaylin thought of Captain Keelan. By now, she had probably obtained permission to breach her jurisdiction. She and her crew were probably already on their way, Sandor said. Of course, that's a week out at best speed. We only have enough food and water aboard to sustain 4 people for a few days. I have another crew member inside. Isaac nodded. No worries. I have enough to share. Well, Theron Prime will be setting in less than an hour. It's too late to start repairs now. Theron Secunde rises a little after 10 o'clock. Remarkable sight. Everything bathed in red, but the light isn't worth a damn to work by. You're all welcome back to my hovel for dinner and conversation. As you might imagine, I don't get the chance to entertain much. As they rounded the pastel dunes, following the sun as it melted into the rippling horizon, Sandor and crew halted in the shadow of Isaac's towering ship, all except Neff, who had agreed to stay with the cruiser. He had forwarded the results of the diagnostics to Sandor's comm phone, along with a list of parts needed to get the cruiser spaceborne. The wreckage that protruded from the sand loomed over them, nearly 100 meters high by Sandor's estimate. Its bronze-plated titanium hull, tarnished and pitted, widened into a massive trapezoid toward aft. Each of the 4 engines could swallow a pair of police cruisers. That's an antique capital ship, Sandor said. Retired from government service over a decade ago. The old man must have bought it at an auction after the sissies stripped it down. Which means he had money. Maybe he still does. Well, the rest of the ship must be buried or scattered in pieces depending on the impact. A short distance ahead of them, Isaac turned and waved his arms. In unison, the trio started toward him. Why did you tell him another vessel would be coming to assist? Zaylin asked. Because I have no doubt the Keelan will show up sooner, rather than later. I needed to make us sound legitimate. Our new friend may have parts aboard his ship we can use to fix the cruiser. Then we can get the hell out of here before the good captain arrives. But you told him our real names. Sandor shrugged and flashed a lopsided grin. Not like we're taking him with us. Who's he going to tell? Keelan. You know me, Zay. I don't leave witnesses.